You know that moment when you realize your husband's real estate investment was actually a down payment on his girlfriend's love nest? Yeah, me neither. Until last Tuesday, when I stumbled upon the mortgage papers tucked inside his business portfolio. I'm Astrid, 45, owner of 3 thriving boutiques in Greenwich, Connecticut, and apparently the unsuspecting wife of a man who thinks our $500,000 home is just a temporary stopover for me. The whole delightful revelation kicked off when Jasper stormed into the kitchen that Tuesday morning, coffee still brewing, and with all the dramatic flair of a soap opera villain announced, "Your time is up here, Astrid. I'm moving in with the other woman in this house." Not exactly the breakfast chat I'd planned, but 18 years of marriage to this man has taught me to expect the unexpected. What he hadn't expected was my reaction, or rather my utter lack of one. There he stood, chest puffed like a peacock mid-display, anticipating tears, begging, or at least some classic female hysteria. I just finished stirring my coffee and asked if he wanted his usual 2 sugars, or if his new lifestyle called for artificial sweeteners. The confusion on his face? Absolutely priceless. Apparently, his dramatic exit speech hadn't accounted for a wife who handles life-altering announcements with the same calm as a weather report. You see, what Jasper failed to grasp is that running 3 successful boutiques in Connecticut's priciest neighborhoods requires a certain kind of business acumen. The same skills I use to track inventory, manage cash flow, and negotiate with suppliers also come in handy when your husband starts scheduling mysterious investment meetings that conveniently align with his yoga instructor's calendar. Brooklyn, 28, perky as a cheerleader, and apparently flexible in more ways than her yoga certification suggests. I'd been tracking his business expenses for months. Those weekend property scouting trips to the Hamptons? Funny how they always matched Brooklyn's Instagram posts from the exact same locations. The consultation fees he was paying his business partner? Apparently, advising on lingerie preferences requires a hefty monthly retainer, not to mention those late-night strategy sessions on market opportunities. Well, I suppose there's a market for everything, but Tuesday morning got really interesting. After delivering his ultimatum with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, Jasper expected me to pack my bags and slink away like some wounded creature. Instead, I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out the house keys, and set them on our Italian marble countertop with the precision of a chess master executing her final move. "Take care of the property taxes." "Darling," I said, gathering my Louis Vuitton bag, the one he bought me for our 15th anniversary, back when he still remembered I existed. "Taxes are due next month." The bewilderment in his eyes? Almost adorable. Almost. What Jasper didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known because he'd been too busy consulting on his girlfriend's flexibility training, was that I'd spent the last 3 months conducting my own real estate research. While he played house with Brooklyn, I was playing a far more sophisticated game with our actual house. You see, 18 years ago, when we bought this place, young and foolishly in love, we'd structured ownership through a joint LLC for tax purposes. Standard practice, really. Except Jasper had always left the tedious paperwork to me. He was the visionary, the big-picture guy, the one for grand gestures and dramatic announcements. I was just the detail-oriented wife, the one who managed the tedious business of keeping our life running smoothly. Those tedious details, as it turned out, included being the managing member of our property LLC, which meant that while Jasper was busy planning to install his 28-year-old girlfriend in our home, he'd overlooked one tiny fact. He couldn't legally kick me out of a house I controlled. But why ruin his fun with boring legalities when I could let him figure it out the hard way? Tuesday afternoon, I spent at my flagship boutique in downtown Greenwich, assisting customers and pretending it was just another ordinary day. Meanwhile, Jasper was presumably explaining to Brooklyn that their romantic nest was finally available for full-time occupancy. I could only imagine their celebration, maybe some champagne, a few selfies in what she thought would be their master bedroom, and definitely some plans about redecorating to match her aesthetic tastes. Between helping Mrs. Peterson pick the perfect scarf and processing inventory for our fall collection, I made a few strategic phone calls to my attorney and accountant. Amazing how fast legal paperwork moves when you've been preparing for months and have all your documents perfectly organized. By Wednesday evening, Brooklyn had moved her things into my house. Her Instagram stories showed her unpacking boxes in our bedroom, arranging essential oils on my vanity, and posing with Jasper in what she captioned as our forever home. The comments from her followers were exactly what you'd expect. Lots of emojis. Hearty congratulations on her beautiful new place. Thursday morning, I drove past my house and saw Brooklyn's little Honda Civic parked next to Jasper's BMW. She'd even hung new curtains in the living room windows. Cute, very domestic, very temporary. I spent the day quietly transferring the remaining assets from our joint accounts into my business accounts. Perfectly legal, since these were funds I'd contributed from my boutique profits anyway. Jasper had always been generous about letting me manage our finances, which meant he had no idea how much money we actually had, or where it all came from. His contribution was his developer salary. Mine was the steady income from 3 thriving businesses, plus the investment portfolio I'd built over the years. Friday morning brought the first phone call. Jasper, sounding confused and slightly panicked, asked why his credit cards weren't working at the gas station. I explained in my sweetest voice that I'd consolidated our finances to avoid any confusion during his transition period. Thoughtful, wasn't I? I even offered to send him a detailed spreadsheet showing exactly which accounts had been moved and why. The second call came Friday afternoon. This time he was less confused and far more agitated, demanding to know why the electricity had been cut off. I gently reminded him that, like the property taxes, the utility bills were now his responsibility as the primary occupant. After all, he'd made it clear I no longer lived there. Brooklyn's Instagram stories that Friday evening showed her and Jasper eating takeout by candlelight, romantically captioned as camping in our new home. The poor girl had no idea she was about to encounter a very different kind of adventure than she'd bargained for Saturday. Morning brought what I like to call the Great Awakening. Not the spiritual kind Brooklyn was probably expecting from her yoga training. The phone started ringing at 7:30 a.m., and judging by Jasper's increasingly frantic tone, their romantic camping adventure had taken a decidedly unromantic turn. Astrid, what the hell is going on? There's a notice on the door about property, taxes, and some kind of lien. His voice carried that delightful pitch that happens when reality starts, colliding with carefully constructed fantasies. I was sipping my perfectly brewed coffee from my temporary downtown apartment, a lovely 2-bedroom place I'd leased months ago under my business name, complete with a harbor view. Oh, that, I said, casually examining my manicure as if discussing the weather. I mentioned the property taxes were due. Remember Tuesday morning, right after your touching speech about my time being up? The silence on the other end was absolutely delicious. You could practically hear his brain struggling to process facts it had never bothered to learn. What Jasper discovered that Saturday, and what Brooklyn learned through a very educational crash course in real estate law, was that property taxes in Greenwich are substantial. When you own a $500,000 home in one of Connecticut's wealthiest towns, the annual tax bill tends to reflect that luxury. And when you've spent 18 years letting your detail-oriented wife handle all the boring financial matters, you might not realize exactly how substantial those taxes actually are. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember those business investments Jasper had been making? The weekend Hamptons trips, the consulting fees, the mysterious expenses I'd been meticulously documenting? Well, it turns out that when you're spending money on your girlfriend's lifestyle while your wife manages the actual household expenses, you might not notice that those household expenses have been covered from a completely separate source. For the past 6 months, while Jasper was busy investing in Brooklyn's happiness, I'd quietly maintained just enough balance in our joint account, the one he monitored, the one he thought covered our mortgage and property taxes, to avoid overdraft notices. The actual bills? Paid from my business accounts, giving me perfect documentation of exactly how much Jasper's midlife crisis was costing our household. Brooklyn's Instagram posts from Saturday reflected the shift in reality. Gone were the romantic candlelit dinners and forever home captions. Instead, she posted a story featuring gas station coffee and convenience store pastries for breakfast, with the notably less enthusiastic caption, "Roughing it while we sort out some paperwork." Sunday brought the next wave of educational opportunities. Jasper called at 6 a.m., clearly up all night researching property law. "You can't just abandon the house and leave us responsible for everything," he shouted into the phone. "We had an agreement." "We did indeed," I agreed pleasantly. "You said my time was up here and I respected your decision. I left the keys just as you requested." What I didn't mention was that leaving the keys didn't actually transfer legal responsibility. But why spoil his learning experience with premature explanations? The agreement he referred to, of course, existed only in his head, the one where I would meekly accept his ultimatum, quietly vanish, and somehow continue paying all the bills for a house I was no longer allowed to occupy. It's fascinating how men who pride themselves on being business savvy can completely overlook the logical flaws in their own plans. Monday morning brought my favorite call of the week. This time it was Brooklyn, her perky yoga instructor voice noticeably strained. "Astrid, hi, this is Brooklyn. Could we maybe talk? Woman to woman?" Oh, this was going to be good. We met at Starbucks. Neutral territory. And frankly, I needed the entertainment. Brooklyn showed up looking significantly less Instagram-ready than usual. Dark circles under her eyes, hair in a messy bun that wasn't the intentionally messy kind, wearing the same outfit I'd seen in her posts from the day before. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," she began, stirring her venti caramel macchiato with the nervous energy of someone who'd just discovered that playing house with married men involves more than redecorating and couples yoga. "Oh, I don't think so," I replied, savoring my simple black coffee. Jasper had been very clear on Tuesday. His exact words were, "Your time is up here." Direct, concise, almost admirable. The poor girl looked like she was about to cry, which was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. Brooklyn explained that they'd spent the weekend trying to figure out how to pay the property taxes, utility deposits, and all the other expenses that come with maintaining a $500,000 home. Jasper's real estate developer salary, while decent, wasn't structured for sudden large expenses, especially when he'd been funneling his discretionary income into his girlfriend's lifestyle for months. "The thing is," Brooklyn said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "Jasper says you've always handled the money stuff, so maybe you could just help us transition. Like maybe pay this one last time and then we'll take over." The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to pay the bills so she could live in my house with my husband. I had to admire her optimism, even if her logic needed serious work. "That's an interesting proposal," I said thoughtfully. "But I'm afraid I'm experiencing some cash flow issues of my own. You see, I recently had to lease a new apartment, and starting over at 45 is surprisingly expensive." What I didn't mention was that my cash flow issues were entirely voluntary and extremely temporary. Brooklyn's face fell as she realized that her plan A, convince the discarded wife to subsidize the new girlfriend's lifestyle, wasn't going to work. But what are we supposed to do? Jasper says the house will go into foreclosure if we can't pay the taxes, and I just moved all my stuff in. "Have you considered downsizing?" I suggested helpfully. "There are some lovely rental properties in the area, much more manageable for a young couple starting out." Brooklyn's expression suggested she was beginning to understand that her fairy tale ending might need some serious editing. Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Jasper's dramatic announcement, brought the phone call I'd been expecting. This time, his voice had moved beyond frustration into genuine panic. Tuesday's phone call was pure poetry. Jasper's voice had reached that particular octave that occurs when reality starts dismantling carefully constructed delusions piece by piece. "Astrid, we need to talk." Seriously, Brooklyn found some papers in the house and we're confused about a few things. "Oh, the LLC documents?" I asked innocently, as if I hadn't been waiting for this exact conversation. Yes, those boring legal papers I've been managing all these years. What seems to be confusing you? I was sitting in my downtown apartment, organizing receipts from Jasper's 18-month affair. Every romantic dinner, every weekend getaway, every piece of jewelry that wasn't for me. Amazing how much documentation accumulates when you're methodical. What Brooklyn had discovered, tucked away in our home office, the room Jasper never entered because paperwork gives him headaches, was the complete file on our property ownership structure. Turns out that when your wife handles all the boring business stuff for nearly 2 decades, she tends to understand exactly how everything works, including the crucial detail that our house wasn't owned by Jasper and me as individuals, but by Greenwich Properties LLC, with yours truly as the managing member. You can't just, we live here now, Jasper sputtered. Brooklyn moved her stuff in. We're making this work, I said warmly. I'm so happy for you both. It's wonderful that you found love. However, as the managing member of the LLC that owns the property, I do have certain fiduciary responsibilities regarding unauthorized occupancy and liability issues. God. I loved using business terminology on him. It was like watching someone try to solve calculus by counting on their fingers. The beauty of LLCs is that they're designed to protect assets and limit liability. When Jasper moved his girlfriend into our property without consulting the managing member, he'd essentially created a scenario where the LLC could be held liable for any damages, accidents, or legal issues involving an unauthorized occupant. From a business perspective, I had a duty to protect the company's interests. Brooklyn got on the phone next, her yoga instructor composure completely abandoned. But I signed a lease. Jasper showed me a rental agreement. Oh, this is getting better by the minute, I said. That's fascinating, I continued, genuinely curious. Could you email me a copy of that lease? I'd love to see what terms Jasper offered. What I suspected, and what Brooklyn confirmed when she sent the document an hour later, was that Jasper had drafted a rental agreement for property he didn't actually have the authority to rent. The lease was a masterpiece of wishful thinking. He listed himself as the property owner and offered Brooklyn a monthly rent roughly half of what our property taxes alone cost per month. He'd even included amenities like pool maintenance and landscaping, services I'd been coordinating and paying for through our household management company for years. But here's where Jasper's business acumen truly shone. He'd structured Brooklyn's lease to begin the day after he kicked me out, with her first month's rent due on the 15th. Not only was he illegally subleasing property he didn't control, he was also planning to use her rent money to cover expenses that were already overdue. Wednesday brought a visit from my attorney, Margaret Pierce, a shark in Armani who had handled my business legal matters for years. We met at my boutique after hours, spreading documents across my office like generals planning a campaign. This is actually more straightforward than I expected, Margaret said, reviewing the LLC paperwork and Jasper's improvised rental agreement. He's essentially squatting in property owned by your LLC and attempting to sublease it without authorization. From a legal standpoint, you have grounds for immediate eviction proceedings. How immediate are we talking? I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. Connecticut law allows for expedited eviction in cases of unauthorized occupancy, especially when there's evidence of attempted fraud, which this rental agreement definitely qualifies as. We could have them out within 2 weeks, maybe sooner if we can demonstrate financial damages to the LLC. The financial damages were easy to document. I'd been tracking every expense related to Jasper's affair for months, and the numbers were staggering. The weekend getaways alone totaled more than our annual property taxes. Add in the restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, and Brooklyn's various gifts, and we were looking at a substantial sum that had been siphoned from our household finances. But simple eviction felt almost too easy. After 18 years of marriage, after watching Jasper dismiss my contributions while funneling money into his girlfriend's lifestyle, after being told my time was up in my own home, I felt the situation demanded something more. Educational. What if we approach this differently? I asked Margaret. What if, instead of evicting them, we treated this like the business transaction Jasper seems to think it is? Margaret's smile was absolutely predatory. I'm listening. Here's what most people don't understand about LLCs. They can buy and sell assets, including debt. Over the past few months, while Jasper was busy playing house, I'd quietly been purchasing some of his outstanding obligations. That expensive BMW he drove, the one he'd been making payments on for 3 years? I now owned the loan, having bought it from the original lender at a slight discount through my LLC. The country club membership he was so proud of, the one where he'd been taking Brooklyn for those romantic brunches, I'd recently acquired the outstanding balance on that account as well. Amazing how willing creditors are to sell debt when approached professionally with cash offers. But my favorite acquisition was the mortgage on the small condo Brooklyn had rented before moving in with Jasper. Yoga instruction apparently doesn't pay as well as one might hope, and she had accumulated several months of arrears. When her landlord mentioned selling the property to recover his losses, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So, let me understand this correctly, Margaret said, reviewing my documentation. You now own Jasper's car loan, his club membership debt, and his girlfriend's former rental obligation? I prefer to think of it as diversifying the LLC's investment portfolio, I said. Jasper always said I should be more aggressive with our business ventures. Thursday morning, I called Jasper with a proposition. I've been thinking about our situation, and I believe I have a solution that could work for everyone involved. Thursday's call was the culmination of months of careful planning. I could practically hear Jasper's relief when I began. Poor man had no idea that my definition of everyone came with very specific limitations. Thank God, he breathed into the phone. Brooklyn's been crying for 2 days, and I just want to figure this out. Reasonably. After 18 years of marriage, after being told my time was up in my own home, after watching him spend our money on another woman's happiness, now he wanted to be reasonable. I'm prepared to offer you both a legal pathway to remain in the house, I said, settling into my desk chair at the boutique with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver a perfectly crafted business proposal. However, as the managing member of the LLC that owns the property, I do need to address some liability issues first. The first liability issue, I explained, was the unauthorized occupancy. Brooklyn was living in property owned by my LLC without proper lease agreements or insurance coverage. From a business perspective, this created significant exposure for the company. However, I was prepared to legitimize the arrangement through a formal rental contract. That sounds perfect, Jasper said, and I could hear Brooklyn in the background asking, What's happening? What kind of rent are we talking? Market rate for a $500,000 property in Greenwich, I replied cheerfully. I've had it appraised recently, I continued, and comparable rentals in the area are running about $4,000 per month, plus utilities and maintenance fees. The silence on the other end was delicious. $4,000! Jasper's voice had climbed back into that high-pitched octave. That's more than our mortgage payment was. Was, I corrected. But you're not dealing with a mortgage anymore. You're dealing with a rental property owned by an LLC that needs to generate appropriate returns for its stakeholders. What I didn't mention was that I'd had the property, reappraised specifically for rental purposes, and $4,000 was actually on the conservative end of the market range. Then the conversation got really interesting. The second liability issue involved outstanding debts that could potentially attach to LLC assets. As managing member, I had a fiduciary responsibility to protect company property from creditor claims, which brought us to some unfortunate discoveries. Regarding Jasper's financial obligations, I'm afraid there are some outstanding items that need to be resolved before we can finalize any rental arrangements, I continued, opening the folder Margaret had prepared. It seems your BMW loan is 3 months behind, according to my information. What? That's impossible. I've been making the payments automatically from our joint account. Ah, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. From our former joint account, I corrected gently. The one I closed last week when I consolidated our finances to avoid confusion during your transition. I assumed you'd want to handle your own expenses now that you're establishing an independent household. The beauty of automatic payments is that when the account they're drawn from no longer exists, the payments stop. And when payments stop on secured debt like car loans, creditors tend to get insistent, especially when they discover the borrower's wife has been controlling the account and is no longer legally obligated to maintain it. Brooklyn got on the phone, her voice tight with stress. Astrid, we can work this out, right? Like maybe we could do payments or something? Jasper says you're really good with money, so maybe you could help us figure out a plan. Actually, Brooklyn, I said, pulling out my second folder, I might be able to help with that. I've recently expanded my investment portfolio to include some debt acquisition opportunities. Interestingly enough, I've acquired several obligations that might be relevant to your situation. What I'd acquired through my LLC, with Margaret's guidance, was essentially the power to determine how aggressively collection efforts on Jasper's debts would proceed. When you own someone's debt, you get to decide payment terms, grace periods, and enforcement actions. It's amazing how much leverage you can accumulate when financial planning is strategic. The BMW loan was the easiest example. I now owned Jasper's car debt, which meant I could offer him new payment terms directly. Those terms, coincidentally, aligned perfectly with the rental rate I was proposing for the house. He could either pay me $4,000 per month for the privilege of living in my property, or I could repossess his car and evict them both. His choice, really. You bought my car loan? Jasper's voice had moved beyond panic into something bordering on disbelief. How is that even legal? Debt acquisition is a standard investment practice, I explained patiently. LLCs purchase distressed assets all the time. When creditors want to recover funds quickly, they'll often sell loans at a discount to investors who can collect more efficiently. What I didn't mention was how much I'd enjoyed becoming his creditor, but the car loan was just the appetizer. The main course involved Brooklyn's former rental property, the cute little condo she'd been renting before moving in with my husband. The property owner had been struggling with her payment arrears and was facing foreclosure himself. When I approached him about purchasing the building, he had been almost pathetically grateful. Brooklyn, sweetheart, I hope you maintained renter's insurance on your old place, I said, consulting my notes. Because technically, you're still legally responsible for the remaining lease term, 8 more months. According to my records, at $1,500 per month. The sound Brooklyn made wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound someone makes when they realize their fairy tale romance is about to cost them $12,000 in obligations they'd completely forgotten about. But I moved out, she protested. Jasper said I didn't need to worry about that lease anymore. Jasper isn't a party to your rental agreement, I pointed out reasonably. And unfortunately, when you abandoned the property without proper notice, you remained liable for the full lease term. The previous owner was preparing to pursue collection. But when I purchased the building, I inherited that obligation along with the asset. What I was offering them was actually quite generous, from a certain perspective. Instead of pursuing separate collection actions on Jasper's car debt and Brooklyn's rental arrears, I was willing to consolidate everything into one simple arrangement. They could remain in the house, my house, for $4,000 per month, and I would consider their other debts satisfied as part of the rental agreement. This is insane, Jasper said. But his voice had lost its fight. You're basically blackmailing us into paying twice what the house is worth. I'm offering a business solution to a complex financial situation, I corrected. You're welcome to explore other options, of course. I'm sure there are lovely rental properties available in your price range, though you might want to resolve the car situation first. It's difficult to apartment hunt without transportation. Friday morning brought their decision, delivered by Brooklyn in a voice that sounded like she'd been crying for hours. The call came at exactly 8 a.m., her voice carrying that particular exhaustion that comes from realizing overnight that your romantic fairy tale is actually a financial nightmare. Astrid, we accept your terms, the $4,000 per month. All of it. Wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Margaret will have the rental agreements ready by Monday. You'll need first month's rent plus security deposit up front. Of course, standard business practice. What I didn't mention was that the security deposit for a property with a history of unauthorized occupancy was necessarily substantial. Another month's rent. Plus damages coverage. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Jasper had kicked me out of my own house so he could play house with his girlfriend, and now they were paying me $8,000 just to move in, plus $4,000 every month thereafter to stay. In essence, I had turned my cheating husband into my tenant and his mistress into a cosigner on a lease that cost more than most people's annual salaries. But the real satisfaction came from watching the long-term mathematics play out. At $4,000 per month, they'd be paying me $48,000 per year to live in a house that had been costing me roughly $24,000 annually in mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Within 2 years, their rent would cover the entire remaining mortgage balance. After that, it would be pure profit from property I already owned. Brooklyn's Instagram post from that weekend told a story far more compelling than any revenge novel. Gone were the triumphant forever home captions and romantic couple selfies. Instead, Brooklyn posted pictures of their weekend activities, touring budget apartments, researching roommate situations, and what appeared to be a very tense conversation at a financial planning office. Sunday evening brought my favorite post of all, a photo of moving boxes with the caption, "Sometimes the universe has different plans than we do. Grateful for the lessons." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. Friends asking what had happened, offering spare bedrooms, and generally trying to piece together why her dream home had lasted exactly 2 weeks. Monday morning, they signed the lease agreement in Margaret's office. Jasper looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks, signing documents that legally required him to pay his ex-wife's LLC more money than he'd ever voluntarily spent on our marriage. Brooklyn kept staring at the numbers as if sheer willpower could make them change. "Just to clarify the terms," Margaret said, reviewing each page with professional thoroughness. "Rent is due on the 1st of each month with a 10-day grace period. After that, late fees apply at 5% of the monthly rent per day. Failure to pay within 30 days constitutes grounds for immediate eviction. $200 per day in late fees." It was almost enough to make me hope they missed a payment, just so I could watch Jasper calculate exactly how expensive his romantic gesture had become. But what I found most satisfying about the entire arrangement was that I hadn't destroyed their relationship. I'd simply made it cost what it was actually worth. For 18 months, Jasper had been funding their romance with money that belonged to our marriage, our household, our future. Now they could fund it themselves at market rates, with complete transparency about the actual expense. The money I'd lost in the divorce settlement, if you could call it that, when no actual divorce had occurred, turned out to be the best investment I'd never made. My boutiques were thriving without the distraction of managing a husband's midlife crisis. My new apartment was peaceful in ways my marriage had never been. And my rental property was generating income that exceeded even my most optimistic business projections. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation. Jasper and Brooklyn had decided to make their arrangement official, which was actually quite romantic if you overlooked the fact that their wedding venue was property owned by the bride's husband's ex-wife. The invitation was addressed to Ms. Astrid Hamilton, Greenwich Properties, LLC. Apparently, they'd finally learned to spell my business name correctly. I didn't attend the wedding, though I did send a congratulatory gift, a beautiful crystal vase with a card that read, "Wishing you both the happiness you can afford." Margaret thought it was excessive, but I felt the sentiment perfectly captured the spirit of our new relationship. The rental checks arrived promptly on the 1st of every month, deposited automatically into my LLC account. Sometimes I wonder if Jasper thinks about the irony when he writes them, paying rent to live in what used to be his own home, to a landlord who used to be his wife, for the privilege of being with a woman who cost him everything he'd built over 18 years of marriage. Mostly, though I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy expanding my boutique chain, planning my next real estate acquisition, and enjoying the particular peace that comes from discovering you're much stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. And if you're wondering what happened to Brooklyn's yoga instructor career, Well, let's just say it's difficult to maintain professional credibility when your personal life becomes the subject of Greenwich gossip circles. She's transitioned into retail management now, working at a lovely little store in the strip mall. I hear she's quite good with customer service, though still learning to balance the register. The property taxes are due next month. I'm sure they'll handle it just fine.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.